Just yesterday, my oldest child and I were sitting on a stone bench by a field while the twins finished up a soccer lesson. We were looking at a list of 50 funny cat Snapchats, as you do. And one was of an older man sitting on an uncomfortable looking wooden stool, looking at his computer, doing some work. And behind him, the cat was snuggled on a desk chair that looked so comfortable. For sure, it swiveled and it leaned back, and there was even a nice blue blanket cushioning the seat. And the caption of this image read, like a script, "Me, Grandpa, why aren't you sitting in your chair? Grandpa, the cat was there and I don't want her to hate me." And it made me think of a story about the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Muhammad, you might remember, was born in the 6th century of the Common Era, and to him was revealed the text of the Quran, believed to be the word of God, the final word revealed to the final prophet, who took up the mantle of those earlier prophets, Adam, Moses, Abraham, Jesus, and others. The Quran holds religious teachings, instructions, exhortations, and lessons, but there's another body of work that travels along with it, the Hadith. The Hadith are stories about the words, actions, and thoughts of Muhammad, and they are lessons for how to live that get interpreted from these Hadith. So one of those stories tells of a morning when the Prophet awoke to the sounds of the call to prayer. He went to dress himself and found that his cat had fallen asleep on his prayer robe. Rather than wake her, he took a knife and cut the sleeve of his robe so that the cat could keep sleeping and he could go on to prayer. Cats have been revered in Islam since the time of the Prophet because of this story and others. It's said that Muhammad used to drink water that had been lapped at by his favorite cat. And there's a story of when the cat of a beloved friend saved the Prophet's life. But even regardless of the adorability of the cats, what this story about the sleeping cat made me think about is the ways that we compromise. Muhammad needed to get to prayer. He also desired peace and slumber for his beloved cat, and certainly didn't want to destroy his prayer robe. But he couldn't have all three. In any given moment, we make choices about what we control, what we are willing to control, what we devote ourselves to, and what we must sacrifice. Last Sunday, Olas spoke to this in his sermon about the earth. He reminded us all that we need to work for its betterment, even as we recognize that there are times when we are not in control, not really. And that's a hard thing for us humans. We crave control. We want to be able to chart a course for the future, work hard, achieve it, whatever that course might be. Now, of course, we struggle to varying degrees. There are definitely those among us who can live happily with greater uncertainty, and those among us who struggle more with it. Many of us, many of us yearn to control our lives, in part because ultimately we know we can't control our deaths. But the thing is, there is so much mystery, so much beyond our control, so much we can't possibly direct in these lives of ours. There is so much that is unknowable, beyond our human grasp. Sundown of next Wednesday until sundown of next Thursday marks the birthday of the Prophet. While the degree of observance and celebration is varied across the world, the birth of Muhammad is viewed in Islam as a blessing to humanity, making this day an important one. As I was thinking about this upcoming holiday, I was thinking about the religion that the Prophet founded. One of the first things I remember learning, probably way back in a world religions course as a child in Unitarian Universalist Sunday school, that's what we called it in my congregation, was that the word Islam meant submission. Not submission in a coerced or violent way, but in a voluntary way that brings joy. The word Islam comes from a group of root words that relate to submission, but also to safety and peace and wholeness. The submission that Islam calls for can then be viewed as voluntary return to wholeness through surrender to God. Part of that submission calls for the enacting of the 5 pillars of Islam, behavioral expectations for Muslims that lend meaning to life through ritual and that create mechanisms for social care and justice. Those 5 pillars are Shahada, the first, the profession of faith. This affirmation that there is no God but God is a statement of belief, as exists in many different traditions, and one that affirms that unique relationship to a unique and singular God. You've likely heard that phrase before. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. It creates a relationship between the adherent and their God. Salat is the daily prayer, which happens 5 times a day and involves voice and body. It's a ritual that invites the entire being into that joyful submission. One orients one's body in a particular direction toward Mecca and bows and kneels and stands. It's a full body engagement. The 3rd pillar is zakat, the giving of alms or charity. There's an expectation that a Muslim who is able will donate money to care for the mosque and other religious sites in their area, but also to care for those who need help. And there's an expectation of giving to help those in need even beyond this pillar of zakat. The 4th pillar is Saum, fasting, especially during Ramadan, the yearly month-long occurrence that invites Muslims to rededicate themselves and to renew themselves spiritually. Those who have reached puberty must fast, except in special medical circumstances. And the 5th pillar is the Hajj, the once-in-a-lifetime trip that a Muslim is expected to make to Mecca, if they are able, to honor the place of the Prophet's birth. It's a pilgrimage to acknowledge that his birth brought on the final revelation. The 5 pillars in Islam are understood as necessary acts that make possible the living of a full life in which religious devotion and belief is carried throughout all aspects of one's living. They bring balance and rightness as one lives both in the mystery of God and in the reality of the world. They lift up strength in belief, kindness and compassion to others, and spiritual maturation and maintenance. The notion of joyful and voluntary submission is embedded in these 5 pillars, in the profession of faith and the physical prostration the prayers require. But what has always stood out to me is that among those 5 mandatory expectations for a life lived in submission is also the giving of charity, the helping of others. So a life is lived not only in service to God, or perhaps to say it better, part of service to God is service to others. As in any religious or moral system, this can become corrupted, but in theory, at its heart, Islam concerns itself not only with one's own relationship to the mysterious and unknowable God, but also with one's community and care of one's neighbor. Now, I don't need to tell you that we are days away from an election, the likes of which many of us have never seen. It promises to have record turnout. Millions upon millions of Americans already have declared what matters most to them. Millions more will exercise the control we are given by our Constitution and by our ideals. It won't be enough of us. In the last 50 years, we hover right around that 50% of eligible voters mark. I often think that along with a systemic oppression of votes, which no one can deny and which needs immediate attention from our government, apathy is also responsible for a lot of those folks not voting. A feeling of, well, it's beyond my control, or the system is broken, or my one little vote won't be the one that sways things. Kind of like when we rationalize our treatment of Earth. My one little composting or not won't be the thing. Whether or not I wash out this can and recycle it won't be the thing. And on some level, we all know that's true. My washing out that can is not the thing. But my choice to recycle or not isn't necessarily about whether or not my recycling personally saves the entire earth, because it isn't actually about me. The same with voting. I live in a state that has voted in one direction for like forever. So maybe my one vote isn't going to change who's elected. It won't. But voting isn't about my personally electing our leadership. All of these choices we make each day, how we choose to exercise control or not to do so, are reflections of our relationship to our own values, our relationship to this world we share, and our relationship to our fellow humans. In his Song of Myself, in the 51st stanza, Walt Whitman writes, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." There's a balance between submission and taking control. Or perhaps better said, submission does not mean giving up our power. We Unitarian Universalists are so diverse theologically. Some of us are atheists, others of us believe in God or identify as humanists or Christians or Jews, as Buddhists or Muslims. We contain multitudes. For many of us, the language of submission to God, I'm sure, does not resonate. But it has been striking me strongly this past week, not because I believe in an anthropomorphic acting God whose will I must bend myself to. Rather, because I believe that whatever I choose to call them, there are unknowable mysteries in this universe. There is wonder. There is something beyond my mortal grasp. And submitting to that reality, acknowledging that there is something, acknowledging that there are things that in my flawed and fragile humanity I cannot direct, that act of submission, even if it feels scary or vulnerable, actually empowers me to direct what I can, to work for this world in every way that I can. Historical Universalists were often accused of believing in universal salvation as a way to get out of being moral, right? So no hell, it's an earthly free-for-all. That was the accusation. Folks who believe in submission to God's will face similar accusations. Oh, well, it's all in God's plan, so humans are off the hook. There is a much larger theological conversation here about free will and personal responsibility, but on a basic level, both those accusations ignore the rounded picture of religious tradition. In Islam, submission to God is not the only thing one is called to do. One is called to live in the world and help one's neighbor and do good and seek justice. In Universalism, the call was to create a heaven on earth that God would be proud of, that would reflect the heaven to which all would return. One's own salvation, one's own wholeness, one's own desires were not the point. The wholeness of the entirety, justice for everyone, that is what our highest ideals call us to. And those highest ideals are achieved not through apathy and inertia bred from our internalized smallness and fear. Those ideals are achieved by balancing an awareness of the mystery that is beyond us with our capacity to control. And even then, we have to compromise. In his poem, Sleeping Trees, Fadi Jauda writes, excuse me, between what should and what should not be, everything is liable to explode. I love that line. It really, really speaks to me right now. This moment we are in feels somewhat explosive. We are floating in that space between what should and what should not be, and we're being asked to live with uncertainty and also exercise our power as we play a role in navigating our country toward the future. And there will be compromises. There will always be compromises. We can't let the cat sleep, make it to prayers on time, and keep our prayer robe whole. We can't do whatever we want also save our neighbors from the pandemic, and maintain American society as it has always been. Some things are mutually exclusive. No one candidate will offer us every single thing we ever wanted in a candidate. There will always be compromise. No one thing each of us will do will make the ultimate difference, and nothing will be perfect. But still we strive toward it. Still we work for heaven on earth, for justice, for care of our neighbors, for wholeness for all of us. And we do it because we understand that together our power is greater and that we each have a role to play. Naomi Shihab Nye's poem Famous has also been sitting with me lately. At the end, she writes, I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. All we are asked to do is what we can do. Be honest about what lies beyond our grasp, live our deepest values in every way we can, and work hard to change this world for the better. It isn't anything spectacular, not really. For most of us, it's not glamorous or perfect, and it won't make us world renowned. We might only ever be famous to ourselves and our dearest loved ones. But what a thing it would be to be known among our people as someone who never forgot what we could do and did everything we could while embracing the wonder of all of this. So go vote. If you haven't already, that's a thing you can do. Vote the values called forth by your deepest beliefs. Vote the awareness of your finitude and mortality, and vote with the deep and abiding knowledge of your power and strength. Make compromises with the greater good and your highest ideals and our shared values ever at the forefront. In this way, we can tilt the world toward wholeness for every being.